So I guess the research questions that Steve's looking at, this is really interesting work, what are the key synoptic scale drivers responsible for historical frost? So we know when the bad frosts have been. Do we understand what the synoptic events are that are driving them? Are these drivers likely to persist, reduce, or be enhanced in response to greenhouse gas concentrations? Or is this a transient feature? So it's quite possible that this may happen for the next few decades and then taper off and so on. So we're doing this fantastic experiment on this planet, and we don't know what the future is. I mean, we know things will be different, but how these things will change is a really interesting area, we're moving around these pressure systems and so on, and it's very, very hard to predict exactly how that would happen. So what they might do and how they interact with production risk. Importantly, obviously, as things get warmer, plants will grow quicker, and this is for viticulture. Bud bursts will be earlier, wheat will grow quicker, and so on. So this sort of frost risk and so on can interact in very complex ways with these things. So even if you don't get an increase in frosts, just the fact that your development's gone a bit faster will speed that up. So that's a really quick blast through. I guess what I'm saying is that we know the climate's changing. One of the really interesting areas of research is going to be on these extreme events. What's driving that? It's not agriculture or anything else. It's the fact that people die in heat waves and cyclones and bushfires. There'll be a huge effort in that. What we have to do in the agricultural community is work out how do we be smart in benefiting from some of that research and applying it to how do we better understand these risks, better characterise these risks, and better manage them. But extreme events require special thinking, because how we manage for extreme events is different. They're the classic ones we insure for, these low frequency, high consequence events, and they're inherently difficult to research and manage, but they're, I think, will be an increasingly important area. So that's a very, very quick run through that.
Thank you. I know that was a lightning fast tour through, and really appreciate you coming and speaking. We do have 5 minutes, and 5 minutes only, for some really quick questions.
One of the things about this year has been, a real feature of this summer has been the lack of hot, dry north winds, and instead we're getting warm, moist north winds instead of hot, dry north winds as a result of probably a big evapotranspiration up there. How likely is that to be a part of the future climate?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think a lot of people would make the point that a major feature of this year is it's a very strong La Nina, and so that infeed of moisture. So again, these tides and waves and how they interact and how La Ninas will happen when the oceans are warmer is an interesting feature. I suspect that hot northerlies will more often be dry in the future than moist. Obviously, at the moment, we have extraordinarily different events. But for a place like Adelaide, even last week, people were saying from Langhorne Creek, some viticulturists are saying that run of came with really, a real aridity, very, very low humidities and so on, and did some real damage. But I think your point's really, really important. We feel a lot more comfortable in a dry heat, but those very, very low humidities with a northerly wind do some terrible things to plants, don't they? The desiccation and so on.
Thank you. Given that, and given all this great research that's being done, are you working closely with at any point with plant breeders and being able to quickly be to produce varieties that will respond to the changing conditions?
Yeah, it's a really good. So yes, I am, and there's a lot of those links are being made. To an extent, the plant breeders' initial response is that they're breeding for a lot of warm conditions anyhow. Glass houses in Australia, a lot of the wheat breeding is put in glass houses over summer, and they're pretty hot places, and so there's a bit of that anyhow. But I think in South Australia, I won't do any of these advertisements and so on, but things like Axe and Gladius, some of these very quick varieties have started to become very, very popular and so on. Partly what they're doing is they're not trying to tolerate these heat events, they're trying to escape them. Would that be a fair comment, Kim? I mean, so to an extent, people talk about drought escape, drought tolerance and drought escape. And what's sometimes a better idea is rather than trying to sort of manage on these events is just tolerate. However, if you've got olive trees or something like that, escape's a bit difficult, isn't it?
I was just wondering, we get a lot of comment, particularly this year, about La Nina. We go back a couple of years, it was, El Nino. How much work is really being done in trying to develop a composite model that would include the Indian Ocean dipole, or the Indian Ocean and the relationship in gradient between the Indian Ocean dipole and ENSO?
Yeah, okay, there is some, although I think it's fair to say that what's happening is you look in time periods, a lot of research is going on to weather and extreme weather events, and the fires and everything else, and cyclones will reinforce that, and a lot on global climate change. Seasonal changes in the middle, which is part of the Managing Climate Variability Program, when you talk to people in the Bureau and so on, I think it's a fair worldwide, is that's the poor cousin. So in the middle there's a bit of, now there's a drop in predictability in the middle there, if you like, in sort of the 6 to, the year to, or to 6 months to maybe 2 year type period. Some people would say it's because we've tried and we can't really crack that. Other people would say there'll be a flow down from the global climate, the huge effort in the global climate models to better capture these sort of seasonal aspects. But I think it's very complex. Certainly, I think what will be foolish to try and do is to say this year is El Nino, Indian Ocean dipole, Southern annular mode, and I'll put the three together in a statistical model, because you end up with too fewer years. We've got to go to dynamical models to handle that.
I think there was a question over there, Colin.
Yeah, Peter, I just had a question. With this work on frost, are the insurance companies, or for that matter, their actuaries and so on, at all involved in being interested, or even, dare I say it, funding this kind of work? Because when you have permanent crops like I do, insurance is something that you consider. It's gotten harder in the last decade to get it and afford it, because they tend to shy away. But if we understood this a little better, they might come back in the game. I don't know.
Yeah, I know that Suncorp was very interested in this climate risk technologies work with Roger Stones and so on. So they are very interested, and they've certainly got lots of flood and cyclone and hailstorm and so on. In agriculture, this whole question, so the classic response to high consequence, low frequency events is insurance.
Yes.
That means you try and share that risk with somebody else, and maybe in the long run that's what we're going to try and do. High value crops, there are some options with that, but often the transaction cost of setting it up and so on can be very considerable. There are lots of ways, and this whole idea of weather futures, where you actually don't have to show loss, but actually just will agree that if the temperature falls below a certain level, we'll pay out on that sort of thing and so on. So it's a really fertile area, and I think what's really interesting about it, what it says is we can't perfectly predict or manage these things, we just got to insure for them in some ways and come up with that sort of, but it's done in America, done in other places and so on. I think it's a really interesting area, and I think actually you should put pressure on Managing Climate Variability Program to keep thinking about it.
Well, me too, because in America they do this. In America, and I'm still trying to get a handle on it, but my jaw dropped when I found my counterparts in a really bad year were automatically covered and didn't have to pay out for about 2/3 of their costs. And I thought, I'm trying to... So
Canada and America, some of that, so the Canadian system is a subsidy. Yeah. So often insurance is a way to get around subsidies. I mean, Canada's a fantastic place, isn't it, Jeff? But the Canadian crop insurance system is basically a way of subsidising without calling it a subsidy. So you've got to be careful on those.
Being too hard.
And you could say some of our drought assistance is too, but we won't.
Jenny, Kylie, very quick. So, hi. I was just going to ask, what do you think of the opportunities for the climate champions to, like, what do you see? You're familiar with the program. What do you see as some of the big opportunities for the climate champions to support you and what you do? And how do you think
Good question.
they can go about, doing that better?
Well, okay, I guess with Kim, I think for all of us in this game of trying to talk through this stuff, extreme events are are a good hook, because people will say to me, don't come and talk about climate change, but heat events and wheat is something we want to talk about. So it's a way of engaging with people. Rightly, people are less interested in 2030 and more interested in what's happening now and how those sort of things change. So I think it's a good hook. We just have to do it carefully and in smart sort of ways. Linking up with some of this work in a practical sort of sense, like Kim has been a really nice. So we've provided Kim some stuff. We're adding greatly to our credibility by adding Kim into our program, sort of thing. So what happens is that he'll go and give the talk with some of this stuff there, sort of thing. So I think that's the sort of that's been a really good example, and that was where he came and he spent half a day talking through with us. And I'd be surprised if there wouldn't be other people in similar situations who would be keen to do that sort of thing. Yeah.
Peter Hayman's one of the best communicators of science I know, so thank you very much, Peter. Peter.